We're going to start in just a couple of minutes, but feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You may have to switch the setting to send it to panelists and participants, but feel free to enter your name and where you're joining us from tonight. And if you're a student, please feel free to add your campus. All right, again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We do have captions that will also show up, so please let us know if you have any questions or any problems accessing the closed captioning. So we'll go ahead and get started tonight. My name is Alyssa Canty. I am the National Youth Programs Manager at Common Cause. And tonight we are hosting our first youth panel, which is a part of Common Cause's 8th annual Blueprint for a Great Democracy conference. With the number of Generation Z and millennial voters increasing, we felt like it was critical to not only highlight their experiences with voting, but to also provide space for them to showcase their activism. One thing is for sure, and that is that Generation Z is ready to step up and drive change. Our moderator tonight is someone who has done just that. She drove trains on her campus when she was a student. She's driven trains as a community organizer and as a campaign staffer. Delaney Vandergrift lives in North Carolina and is a community organizer with experience curating spaces for people to grow their political imagination while receiving thorough political education. Previously, she was the National HBCU Organizer Manager for Bernie 2020 and is currently working for Dream Defenders, the Debt Collective, and NC BLOC. It is with great excitement that I turn it over to Delaney Vandergrift.
Hey everyone, I am so excited to be here. And so tonight I'm gonna go ahead and introduce the panelists, this incredible group of young people that are changing the entire world. So I'm gonna start with Abdullah Akil. Abdullah is an 18-year-old LIU Brooklyn freshman that studies political science. He currently serves as the National UNICEF Youth Ambassador to the USA. In his work locally, Abdullah interns with the Brooklyn Borough President's Office to see next steps to make Brooklyn a child-friendly city. In addition to his work with UNICEF, he volunteers with his local Muslim American Society Center. Everybody, Abdullah Akil. Next, we have Ameer Abdul. Ameer is a grassroots community organizer who began his work in advocacy, combating human sex trafficking while also fighting to destigmatize issues surrounding mental health and gender equity. Ameer also stands as campaign manager for Period.org and is an Mpower Change Civic Engagement Fellow. Passionate about inspiring civic engagement, Ameer has worked diligently over the years to mobilize young activists across the country to voice their concerns and fight to combat a range of issues regarding gun control and climate change to healthcare and education reform. Everybody, Ameer. Christina Williams. Christina is a Philadelphia, Pennsylvania native and a junior at Clark Atlanta University, where she is currently pursuing a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. She is serving as the president of the Clark Atlanta University Political Science Association and Ignite at Clark Atlanta University. She is a leader both on and off campus. She is in student government, a campus vote project Georgia Runoff's Democracy Fellow, and a public citizens intern with the Democracy Is for People campaign. Christina describes herself as an ambitious, organized, deliberate, and resilient leader who is passionate about advocating for and working towards equity for all marginalized communities. And she aspires to attend law school immediately following the completion of her undergraduate studies, with plans of becoming a civil rights attorney and eventually running for public office. Emily is a third-year undergraduate public policy student at the University of California, Riverside. She is currently the Civic Engagement Director for the Associated Students of UCR. Emily is a longtime resident of the Inland Empire and started organizing around voting in high school. Since then, she has continued informing and organizing students on the importance of voting and participating in their government and communities. Next, we have Jonathan Gorham. Jonathan is a current junior at Bowie State University, majoring in business marketing. He is currently a Common Cause Maryland Fellow. Jonathan is a big sneakerhead, I love that, and has his own sneaker reselling business. He also enjoys making YouTube videos, exploring and learning new things in his free time. Noah Rosnitz. Noah is a public policy associate based in Atlanta, Georgia. He has worked in public affairs and lobbying in Georgia and has experience in international trade, business development, logistics, and healthcare. Noah graduated from Georgia State University in 2019 with a bachelor's of public policy. His goal is to make government more equitable for all and to increase the understanding of what your government can do for you. Rakia Stafford. Rakia is a graduating senior from the University of West Georgia with a bachelor's in political science. She serves as a student representative for civic engagement at her university. She hopes to have a career as a litigator within juvenile justice reform. And last, we have Tejas Muthuswamy. Tejas is a high school senior from Richmond, Virginia, and he's super excited to be a part of the panel. When he's not fighting for justice and increasing civic engagement, he loves to binge watch TV shows. The Crown, I love The Crown, and Parks and Rec are his favorites, same, and eat different kinds of foods. A child of immigrants who couldn't vote until recently, the political system is very, very important to Tejas, and he is very excited to share that with everyone. So we have an incredible panel. I don't know if y'all are excited, but I know that I am incredibly excited to jump into these questions. So today we're going to begin with a conversation around voting rights in the 2020 election. For most young voters, this was their first presidential election and was described as the most important election of their lifetime. We know that many young voters experience confusion trying to determine the best way to cast a ballot this year. Jonathan, Noah, Rakia, Tejas, how have you seen voting rights affect your community and generation?
I guess I'll start first. I've personally seen voting rights affect my community and our generation from many different ways, because it literally affects everything we experience in our daily lives, such as our safety and to housing and education, choices we make about our health, like legalizing marijuana, and smaller things such as the speed limit. And we solely rely on the government to make these changes. So basically, when people are denied their basic rights, it becomes harder for them to advocate for policies that benefit our communities. That's it.
Yeah, I'll follow up. This election was amazing. Right after I started at Georgia State and I was a freshman, shortly after followed the 2016 election. And, from my point of view, I came from a school district in northern Georgia that was predominantly white. And I went to Georgia State University, which is an extremely, extremely diverse university. I think one of the most in the nation. And seeing the effects of the results of the 2016 election on other individuals that weren't, white or a male like me, it really opened my eyes to what a lot of other people are going through when it comes to government. Maybe I didn't have as much of a grasp on the system at that time, but the biggest shift I've seen, especially being here in Georgia, I think started in 2018 with our gubernatorial election. Stacey Abrams, Brian Kemp, and you had then Secretary of State Brian Kemp presiding over his own election. And, there was all, these allegations of voter fraud or people being purged off the rolls. And, Brian Kemp ended up winning. And I think a lot of people were like, there's something systematically wrong with, how we run elections here in Georgia. And I know that's a fight that Stacey Abrams took up, the biggest thing I've seen going into this election is the rise of how being civically engaged is almost kind of cool. you see a lot of people doing it. You see a lot of people talking about it on social media, sharing stories, sharing, different videos about, just how to be involved. And this is something I have never seen before in my life. And we have so many groups here in Georgia doing great work, the Campus Voter Project, the New Georgia Project. I know Fair Fight. I know me with Common Cause. I know we're doing good work, but it's just the biggest change. And I think, the message has been out there. You can vote in person on election day. You can vote early. You can request an absentee ballot. We have really gotten it out there, the different ways you can vote, the benefits of each or the disadvantages. And, it's really just this education campaign, because I know that everybody on this panel, and even if you're on this call, you're probably pretty civically engaged. You probably are really interested in what's going on. But you got to think, a lot of other people our age, maybe it's not that important to them. They go, yeah, I'll vote, but I'm not going to go much further beyond that. And I think that's where people like us and people that are in the chat and watching this, it's kind of up to us to step out to, help educate these other individuals about, how the system works and, how we can really make it work for us. Because, we're the biggest generation, Gen Z, at least me, we're the biggest generation. We're the most diverse generation. We really have to show what we want in our government, because if we do, we are going to see it change. So, yeah.
I totally agree with what Noah said. I am also a resident of Georgia, so I got involved in 2018 when I seen what happened between Stacey Abrams and Brian Kemp. I had just started, that was my first time voting, and I was fresh in college, and it was very upsetting to see polling places close, where people had to drive 20 and 30 miles to get to an early voting location and things of that nature. So that's where I got involved, and I started my work with the Campus Election Engagement Project, just trying to build up civic engagement on my campus. I go to school about an hour outside of Atlanta, so it's a little bit more rural, and you don't see a lot of people trying to get college students involved. So it took a lot of on the ground work. It took a lot of going to classrooms and trying to get faculty to be more involved with the whole process. And by the end of it, with this past election, we were able to build a coalition all across our campus that involved athletics. We had different faculty members, our Center for Diversity and Inclusion. We had our president in on it. So it was a really great experience being able to bring everyone together and come against some of those things that we had seen. Students didn't know like where their polling location was. So this year we provided rides during the early voting period so that people could get there. We helped people check their absentee ballots and where their polling location is and showing them how to early vote and what they need to bring. We were at the polling places in Carrollton, which is where I went to school. I just recently graduated, but we were at the polling location showing people what they needed, had QR codes to make sure that they were in the right places. So on a small scale, I've seen all throughout the state that in Georgia, that's what we were doing on our college campuses, and it really showed. And I think that speaks to our generation and our small community of college students that we are going to share the correct information, and we are going to be the ones to show that we are civically engaged, and yes, that this election does determine things for us later in life.
And I can close us off for this question. I think one other thing, compounding on what the other panelists have said, this election was historic. And it was historic for a number of reasons, but I think one of the key reasons is that a record amount of immigrants went out and voted. And as a child of immigrants, many people in Gen Z are children of first-generation immigrants to this country. We can all relate that it's not easy to vote as an immigrant. You have to become a citizen. There's a whole different logistical process that you have to go through. You have to wait years and years and years while people make decisions for you, but you can't have a say in those decisions. And so I think it's really, it's lovely that so many immigrants, and now me, children of immigrants, are now getting involved in the voting process. And I think that's one of the most important parts of this election. And that's what I'm really excited to see, this trend in the future as we become a more diverse majority minority country by 2050. I think it's really important that we're all able to use our voices in this way.
Thanks for all of those answers, y'all. It's incredible. I wish so bad that we could hear the audience, because I'm sure people would be clapping for you all, because that's incredible. The mention of Georgia, everybody's been talking about Georgia. Noah and Rakia, I can only imagine what the energy was like there on the day of the election. I bet it was incredible. So the next question that we're gonna ask is, despite the concerns of voting during a pandemic, young people had record voting turnout and stepped up to work at polling sites and serve as election protection volunteers. However, we know that things were not perfect for every voter. What gaps do you think the pandemic created for voters in your community? And this is a question for Abdullah, Ameer, Christina, and Emily. Anybody can start.
Thank you for the question. I feel like it's a really important question that's overlooked. And where I'm from, I live in New York City. And so it might seem like everything is going well over here, but there is always things that need to be fixed. And so in this busy city, while everything was going on, there was a huge aspect of, since everyone is at home, someone needs to stay with the children, someone needs to babysit. And usually you can't hire anyone during the pandemic just because of safety concerns. And so there was a huge aspect of parents needing to take their children with them to voting locations, which caused a huge, longer lines, slower polling locations. And these are just small inconveniences, but really should be something that we try working on in future years. But again, it is because of the pandemic and people were not able to hire babysitters. And something else that I wanted to discuss was just a general GOTV work that was going on, like the get out the vote work and phone banking, like the fact that we weren't really able to go door to door like every election year, whether it's local elections or major elections. And this is my first major election that I'm going to be voting in, or that I voted in specifically. But in general, we weren't able to go door to door telling people, hey, this is who we believe in. Hey, I'm from, for example, Bernie Sanders' office or whoever it is. We weren't able to do that this pandemic. But I'm very glad that we were able to quickly shift into phone banking and doing other kind of social media work. And we were very quickly able to do that. And especially because of the help of, like what other panelists have said, that Gen Z voters were really on the front line in doing all of this. They were on the front line with these social media campaigns and everything else that was going on to make sure that people were still going down to vote.
Yeah, and I'd actually just like to build off of what Abdullah actually just mentioned. Abdullah and I actually worked very closely together on this last election and GOTV work. And, something we noticed, both Abdullah and I actually come from Muslim immigrant brown communities, right? And so typically within our community, what we see is there is a lack of trust in the system. There's a lack of trust in, what voting will really do for us, for our community, for our kids and our families. And typically what we do in a normal year, what we'd see is, to Abdullah's point, is the GOTV work is we'd get lots of boots on the ground, right? We'll get a lot of field organizers. People will be in there, and what that will do is it educates our communities, right? It builds that trust. It builds an understanding of the importance of voting, and that is truly what leads to the power, right? It leads to voting and voting in record numbers. Now, we did have record numbers, which was very nice to see, but I really do believe we could have done a much better job if we were able. But, with incorporating mitigation strategies and having to social distance and things of that nature, we weren't exactly able to get as deeply into our communities as we'd like. I know we had a lot of Zoom calls and things like that, but not everyone has that luxury. Not everyone knows really how to navigate these different systems and have these opportunities. But so, I wish we didn't have to deal with that, but regardless of that, I was happy to see the record number voting turnout.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And actually, when you think about it, we live in a country where it's extremely hard to vote in a good year. Voting is already extremely inaccessible to a lot of our communities. And when you factor in the impact of COVID-19, especially on students, you can see immediately how much more difficult it would be to do something as simple as vote. I know myself, my university went completely remote in March, and we've never been back to campus. I have friends, we came back from spring break and we were told we had at most a week to pack up our entire lives, move most of us across the country, and try to finish school. So when you add on to that even something as simple as remembering to return an absentee ballot, that's difficult. You know, I'm trying to pass classes, I'm taking care of family members, I may be moving back and forth between different homes, and you want me to remember to vote? So I think that that was kind of an issue for a lot of my peers and a lot of young people. But I also think that on the flip side, something positive that came from this experience is, again, the reliance on social media and all of the digital organizing, and us trying to fill that gap and making voting a lot more accessible really helped. And I also think that a lot of the disparities that were highlighted with COVID-19 really fueled a lot more young people to vote, because we looked around and saw that this cannot be the best that we can do.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and jump in off of Christina's point of accessibility. So yes, California does have, has made strides, but stuff did happen in this election. Because of the pandemic, we had been slowly transitioning to a Voters' Choice Act. So like mentioned earlier, having the choice to vote early, to mail your ballot. And so we had about 14 counties transitioning to this mode. And then 2020 hit, the pandemic hit, and the governor was like, all the counties are doing mail by vote ballot. So we had a little bit of fission. Counties were scrambling to make sure to have all the options accessible to folks. There was issues with like voter intimidation with drop boxes. We had a few, we had a few like systems were being kind of logged up just because of what was happening in the political climate, and folks didn't feel like they could just mail in their ballot. And I also worked as like a poll worker during that time, during the election season, and it was very interesting to see just how many people were coming out in droves to, like how many people from ages all across the spectrum, it was their first time voting, and they were excited to do so. But the pandemic did cause some gaps in voting.
Yeah, for sure. You all mentioned a lot of different things, a lot of different issues, but I think what's key across the board is that you all were you guys were able to overcome all of them, which is what I think is so incredible. The mentioning of digital organizing and social media, that's like what we do. That's what the baby millennials and the OG Gen Zers, that's just, we just already knew how to do that. So I think we were well prepared. You all were well prepared for this moment. So the next question that I have for you all is, it's a two-part question. So everybody listen close. So after the 2016 election, we knew that online disinformation would be a problem, and that young voters and voters from minority populations would be targets. The first part of the question, Abdullah, Christina, Noah, and Rakia, is if you know of any, what type of disinformation was out there, and where do people in your community come across disinformation? And the second part of the question is, in what ways do you think youth and young activists could prevent disinformation from discouraging young people to participate in democracy? If you need me to repeat any part of that, just let me know and I'll repeat it.
So yeah, 100%. This is a really important question. I'd like to zoom in more on where I'm from New York City, and I live in Staten Island, which is known mostly to be the opposite of what New York City is. And obviously in the 2016 election and even in the 2020 election, every year when elections happen, it's not only about the presidential election. There is so much more happening where local elections are happening, and these local elections could make a big deal to where you live. And so where I live in Staten Island, there was a huge local election that was going on where Staten Island was going to flip back to red, which it has been for a long time, and it's been blue for only a couple of years. And so what's been happening is, for the past year or so, there's been a huge amount of disinformation that's been going around from both candidates, like accusing the opposite candidate of things. And what confused a lot of young voters was how all these platforms are agreeing to share this misinformation, how YouTube, Facebook, Instagram are allowing them to promote this misinformation that sometimes it's very clear misinformation, something that any voter would understand, or anyone that really saw the video again would clearly understand. And so it's really important for us to look at the people that are sharing this information and ask them the question on why they're sharing the information. And we have to make sure to hold these people accountable, regardless if they win the race or not. So regardless if a candidate won the race on that misinformation or not, we must hold them accountable, just because it gives a green light to all these other candidates if that one person goes away without any kind of accountability. So we have to make sure that that's evident. Secondly, just going on to the second part of the question is when that misinformation is going around, and as much as it could seem like it's a lot, we have to make sure that young voters and the people that understand this make their voice even louder. Because you could really just silence all the misinformation that's going on by making sure that youth are really in the streets. Youth are showing that youth have to show that we know what's going on. We see exactly what's been happening in your campaign. We see where the big money is coming from in your campaign, and we're gonna call you out on it. And the second we're able to do that, the second campaign will pass by, the third campaign will pass by, the fourth campaign, and candidates will begin to realize that youth are really onto them. And they won't be able to do these tactics that they've been doing to try spreading misinformation or anything like that. They're going to understand that the eyes are on them, and they'll make sure to vote accountably, and they'll also be able to serve the places that they're representing properly.
So I'll jump in to the first part of the first part of the question. I would say disinformation is really rampant, especially like we said previously with COVID-19 and us relying more on digital organizing and social media. It's everywhere. But even beyond that, it can come from friends and family members, and we've even seen our own government pretty often. So I think it's important to be conscious of that, but I also think it's important to remember that disinformation is targeted and it's intentional. More often than not, it's not an honest mistake. It's on purpose and it's targeted for certain communities. So I think going into the second part of the question, the first step is to really be conscious of that. Think critically and don't take everything at face value. But some other things I would say, again, most of us on this call are civically engaged. So I would say it's our responsibility to do our own research. Really don't get all of your information from one space. Try to diversify where you get your news and your information from. Even try to diversify like the social media accounts that you follow, and make sure that they're all valid, respected people. I would also really emphasize try to find the whole story. I know that a lot of times now we really live off of headlines and catchy phrases, and even Twitter, you can only put 140 characters. That usually does not tell the whole story, and that's a really quick way to spread disinformation. So really try to find the whole story. And also don't amplify disinformation. I know that it's really tempting to, even on Twitter, quote a tweet and say this is not true. But when you think about the way that these platforms work, you're only serving their purpose because you're helping more people see that disinformation. So make it a point to just do your own research and share your message. And yeah, share that with other people.
Yeah, I want to jump in and touch right off of what Christina said. On social media in this, instant information age, it is so easy to read a tweet or to see a Facebook post and just hit, I agree with that, I disagree with that, share or whatever. We really need to be more diligent about looking at what we're retweeting, looking actually at the article, seeing what it's talking about. This is how agencies and news companies, this is how they make their money, is by spreading their content out. So if they can get you with a headline to just retweet and share their stuff, they've already won because you didn't even read it. So, when it comes to fact checking things, I feel like our generation is at an advantage because we grew up in the information age. It seems like I know, at least for myself and my friend group, we have a much greater nuance when it comes to discerning information online than I know with maybe my parents' generation. They'll see things. I sometimes going on to Facebook is nauseating, seeing what my family or other people are sharing or talking about, especially following the 2020 election. Talking about how my uncle is talking about, what great fraud went on in Pennsylvania, or, how this person is corrupt in Nevada. And I'm like, yeah, I know you are not exactly qualified to speak on these things, and you're promoting a lot of information about it. So, I love going into the comments and just presenting a nice little counter argument, being like, I think maybe we should double check these things. Maybe let's not just share these right off the bat. So, the biggest things for combating disinformation, you got to check the source. Where is it coming from? Is that reputable? Who's the author? Check your own biases when looking at things, because just because it's from a different viewpoint, or maybe because it's from an organization you don't agree with, doesn't necessarily mean it's not factual, or it doesn't automatically mean that it's right if it's an organization you like. And then definitely read beyond. If you read something that sounds too good to be true or sounds outlandish, it might be. So go look for other readings on that topic and try and support with other information. That's kind of the role we kind of have to serve as digital gatekeepers, because, when the president can quote tweet anybody on Twitter with, an egg in their profile picture, we really need to be working. So I think twofold, it's up to us. And then I think we need to work towards legislation to where we can get these companies to police themselves too. So anyway, yeah.
I definitely agree. The panelists before me did a great job explaining their answer to this question. I think a big thing that I saw within this past election was just around how to necessarily go into the polls and the information around it. A lot of people wanted to do mail-in ballots in Georgia, and there was just so many different things out there, like, when do you request your mail-in ballot? When should you turn it in? So many people are like, well, the mailing system is all over the place, so you need to turn it in super duper early. And some people are like, well, I heard it's this day, so I'll do it at this time. And another thing was that people were like, okay, drop it off at the ballot box. And a lot of people were just dropping them off anywhere in the state, in any ballot box, and they didn't know that it was supposed to be in their specific county where they were registered, or at that county's election office. And I just think, as many of the panelists mentioned before me, is that in the headlines or the quick tweet, you only get a piece of the information that you need, and you really just need that full story. So it really does take research. But what I've noticed is that a lot of people don't have the time, or they don't put in the effort to do that research. And as Christina mentioned, as we are all civically engaged students and organizers in our community, it is a part of our job to make sure that we go out and ensure that they know this information, and that we fill in the gap of what's not being presented in our media. I'm so sorry. But that's my point on like how we can fill in the gap with the disinformation, and how we can do a better job of making sure that people know exactly what they need to know for elections.
Yeah, those are incredible answers. I heard disinformation is targeted and intentional. That is huge. And then the question of, why are social media sites and candidates sharing the bad information? Like, why? That's an incredible question that we should continue to ask. Do your research. That's another thing that I think all of you all said. And Noah, I love digital gatekeepers. That young people are digital gatekeepers. Facebook is an interesting place. Not a lot of folks that are our age are there. But I feel like every time I go to Facebook, I see something and I'm like, wow, that is, whew. And so, we need all the digital gatekeepers.
It's rough. It's rough to go back on there and be like, I used to go on this every day. I can't believe it's like this now. This is terrible.
Yes. Yeah. So we need all the digital gatekeepers on Facebook. We need to deploy there. But so the next question is, so Common Cause, along with many other voting rights organizations, are supporting HR 1, which will expand access to voting, address campaign finance issues, and redistricting reform. What are some voting rights changes that you would like to see that could help communities have better access to voting? This is a question for Ameer, Emily, Jonathan, and Tejas.
Yeah, and I'll just get us started there. So, to me, when I look at voting, I think there are three big things in my mind that we need to work on. The first being automatic voter registration, right? And that really taps into the truth that really the average person is extremely busy. We don't typically think on a day-to-day basis about registering to vote, right? So we need to be able to take that burden off of people. if we truly consider ourselves a democracy that's looking to capture the voice of the people of the country. And with that is the second thing, which is making election day a holiday, right? I think we really need to look into doing that. We have to make voting as accessible as possible, and by making election day a holiday that improves voter turnout. I was just reading the other day how we have one of the lowest turnout rates of any modern democracy, and that's ridiculous. And so that again plays into the third part of this, in that we need to mandate Congress or state government to build more or have more polling locations, right? We saw in 2013 the Supreme Court struck down like key parts of the Voting Rights Act, which led to numbers of polling locations closing. And we saw, especially this year with COVID, how that's been terrible, right? Long lines, right? These places are extremely packed and super busy, and it's really disenfranchising mainly really people of color and people with disabilities, and so people who are relying on same day voting as well. It's really just all comes and causes this issue. But so by having these three things all together, I think we're able to expand voting and allow more people to go out and do that. Because if you're having to get on a bus, you're having to walk to a bus stop, get on a bus, sit on the bus for 20-30 minutes, right? Get in line for 3 hours. This is nothing, this is like very normal. Get in line for 3 hours, vote, get back on a bus for a half hour. Like, you have work, you have a life, you have children to take care of, you have all these different things. What that's going to do is really stop people from having to go vote, because it turns into a chore. We need to make this something that people want to do, and we need to show people that we want to hear their voice. And by following these three things, I think we'd be able to do that as a country.
Yeah, and I 100% agree, Ameer. Voting should be accessible. It should be automatic voter registration. And when we're going into that and talking about accessibility, especially for young folks, I think Christina brought it up earlier, but making election day a non-instructional day in our institutions. Students, college students aren't just students. They're people of color, they're parents, they have jobs, and they need time to be able to work in addition to their class schedules. And expanding on that and reaching either further to the next generation. In California, we had a proposition to let 17-year-olds vote, and they could vote in the primary election if they were 18 by the general. But I still feel like you should be able to vote when you're 17. I think that it's crucial that we get students and young people started in our democracy earlier on, so they kind of build that that culture of civic engagement. But yeah.
Yeah, so just to piggyback off what Ameer and Emily said, I do feel as though voting day should be a holiday and everyone should have it off, because not everybody's able to make it. Some people have to work, especially with the long lines, and definitely in a pandemic, people need to make those hours to provide for their family. And also, I feel as though drop boxes should be provided for every election, if we still have mail-in ballots, but I feel as though it makes it easier for certain people who can't go out and mail in. Also, by having colleges, more polling sites on campus to create specific times for them to fill out their ballots and drop it off without leaving campus. Because I know for me personally, last year, when it was my first time voting, Uber actually offered free rides to near polling sites, which is a help for me. I just know a lot of people who aren't able to have transportation. If I wasn't able to do Uber or had a friend that could take me to the polling site, I might not be able to vote, which could have made a big difference in the election. So I feel as though easier accessibility, transportation to these polling sites would definitely make a big difference.
Absolutely, I agree with all that's been said so far. I think automatic voter registration is really important. Election day is a holiday. But I think one thing that we don't really think about when we think of voting rights is redistricting and gerrymandering. And it's something that really has a deep effect on all of us. I think if legislators and politicians are able to draw their districts, they're essentially picking their voters. And so many state legislator drawn districts are drawn in such a way that makes it so that our vote doesn't matter, because they're either super partisan, or sometimes, even though racial gerrymandering is illegal, sometimes state legislatures get around that and they draw districts that are simply unfair, and we're not picking are true state legislators. And I think that's really, really critical. And I also think that redistricting is something that affects young people as well. And it's not something that's really talked about, but young people tend to live in cities and in highly urban areas that tend to be the most gerrymandered, especially because blocks are so close together and people live so close together. Legislators can easily gerrymander around a city block just to try to win their next election. So redistricting is a really, really important issue that we need to be talking about more. I know my state, I'm from Virginia, is finally introducing an independent commission, and I hope more states do that across the board so we can finally pick our politicians.
Yeah, incredible answers. I love making Election Day a holiday. That's incredible, especially if we want working class people to be able to vote. And Tejas, you mentioned immigrants, being a child of immigrants. And we could have seen a turnout of so many more immigrants if folks didn't have to work. And also hearing that students aren't one-dimensional. Emily, of course, students are not just going to class and going home to look at a book and then going back to class. There's so many other things that have to happen, and you all know that because you all were doing the work and going to school. You're perfect examples of that. Drop-off boxes, Jonathan said, more on-campus polling sites, and gerrymandering. I think all of those are incredible points that you all made. So the next question that I'm going to ask is for everyone. So voting rights is an issue that intersects with many other issues. What are some of the issues that you believe need to be a priority for your community, especially Generation Z?
So there are so many issues. We all know that each of us care about a specific issue more than others, and we all hope that our politicians could follow up with these issues. And something that really matters a lot to me is children and youth rights. And that's something that you really don't hear when politicians mention their plan for when they get elected. They usually mention everything but how they're going to be servicing almost the biggest or almost the majority of their voters. And they never mention how they're planning on creating a youth commission or a children commission. And it's sometimes disappointing that we are voting for you but you're not accommodating for us. And it's something that we need to make sure is heard much more by our politicians. And not only that, we need to make sure that these politicians really understand that general foundation, because we need to let them know where their voters are coming from. And I'm pretty sure that they know that, but it needs to just be made clearer, or it just needs to be louder, that the majority of your voters in many different states or in local elections are young people. And these young people really have, it's really in their hands whether you're going to win or not. And so they really have to be, we all in general, adults, and not only politicians, but generally adults, have to be voting for the person that has children on the ballot, the person that has young people on the ballot. Because as soon as we're able to do that, someone that genuinely believes in young people, someone that genuinely believes in youth and young people and children, is going to be someone that's going to believe in us when we get older, when we're on the ballot eventually. And so it's so important to believe in this when we're younger, just then when we get older, when we are eventually politicians or working in any kind of state level, trying to change or make change in any way, we remember young people, or we remember where we were 10 or 15 years before.
Yeah, and Abdullah's exactly right about that. And there are so many different issues. I feel like we could just throw a dart, and anywhere we land, it's something we need to work on for sure. But I look at a few things, and a few things that are important to me are talking about expanding healthcare, right, Medicare for all, things like that, making sure that our community, our people are taken care of, and other issues like income and wealth inequality and raising the minimum wage. This is, bringing funds into our community. And what that does is actually helps work on, taking care of the youth within the community and making sure that they have access to other things that, more affluent communities have as well. Right. And that really leads into things like education reform as well. We need to make sure that our communities also have, equal access to the same type of education and things of that nature. And we see how that eventually leads to outcomes as we grow older. And, I think Generation Z, we're doing the young people are doing such a great job in general and fighting for these issues. But as we go on and as we keep voting, I'm confident we're going to get the right people into office to make the change that we need.
Yeah, I'll be brief. As a young Black woman, I have to say the most important issue to me is racial equity. And I use that as an umbrella term for a lot of things. For me, that really encompasses, of course, criminal justice reform, but I also think that we need to expand that conversation to include economic reform, climate change. Pretty much any issue you can think of for me falls under that umbrella. But also personally, I think that our government needs to be forced to have a serious conversation about reparations, a serious policy-minded conversation about that. Um, yeah, so those are the most important things for me.
Yeah, for sure. I come from a part of California called the Inland Empire, in Southern California, and I guess we're not traditionally what you think of, like when you think about California. Um, our our area is very purple still. We don't really have yet. We have nonprofits and organizations on the ground doing community organizing, but there isn't empowerment in our local elections yet. And so what's important to me is making sure that folks uh, of all backgrounds and ages are empowered to vote in their local elections because of the impact that they have. Just the impact that they have on your everyday life. I mean, literally driving down the street and like running into potholes, and who is in that local office fighting for you, and fighting for you and your children. So that's a really big issue for me that Gen Z and young folks are starting to get at. I'm seeing a lot of folks in my community starting to run for council, city council, and supervisor positions really young, and starting that work. But that's a big issue for me.
So yeah, I have a few issues that I feel are important to see prioritized, such as, education and health disparities. But, agreeing with Christina, being a Black male, one that is on top of my list is racial disparities in the prison population. Although, the data states that disparities have declined, Blacks are still serving longer sentences than whites for the same crime, but, still doing more time. And, Black men constitute, about 6% of the population, but we currently take up more of the population in the prison systems. And I feel as though this is something that needs to be changed immediately, especially for, non-violent crimes or crimes that aren't that as big.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. Every single thing that's been mentioned so far, we talk about criminal justice reform, education reform, healthcare reform, are all things that I think are going to change in our lifetimes, which is something that I'm excited about. Sad thing is the wheels of government turn extremely slow. So I really hope we don't have to wait a long time for these things, because I think they're long overdue. The biggest thing in my mind is, we're only given every single person, every single citizen is given one vote. And that's how we get to influence our elections. But when you look at corporations and PACs, they are able to funnel millions and millions of dollars to candidates that they support and who they want to back. And then those candidates who then take that money then have a vested interest in that company. And they are now in their positions, wherever it may be, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, representing not only their constituents' needs, but also the needs of the people that bankrolled their campaigns. I think the biggest thing in order to get a lot of these policies done that we want to get done is reducing the amount of money in politics and campaign finance reform. I think if we can get through those things, we're going to see a lot more candidates that look a lot maybe less like me. You know what I mean? We're going to have a lot more equitable of a candidate pool to pull from, and I think that's what we need in this country. We are a representative democracy, but if you look at Congress, if you look at who's there, that is not representative of the population of the United States, and that's not correct. We need to work to change those things. I think if we can work to change how campaigns are run and the amount of influence corporations and big business have on our elections, we really are in turn going to see the benefits tenfold. We're going to see healthcare legislation go through easier. We're going to see criminal justice reform go through easier. We're going to see so many of these things go through easier. And this is, I think this is something I'm going to be fighting, hopefully not my entire life, but if it is, that's something I'm going to have to do because it's so important to me. So, yeah.
I want to thank everyone for their answers. They were absolutely amazing, and mine all piggyback off of you all. I want to work towards reducing the school to prison pipeline here, specifically in Georgia. Um, Recently, within the last year, our legislation cut out about 2 billion out of the education budget, which slashes into some policies that I have put forth for some different scholarships I've applied to that mention how we could add different programs within our schools that take away in school suspension and deal with having more mental counselors handling certain issues and things of that nature. But it feels like Georgia is going backwards, and we're already listed around like the 48th state out of the 50 states for education. So I'm hoping that we can work towards education policy, which plays a huge role into the school to prison pipeline.
And just to close it off, I think for me, probably my biggest issue is housing reform. I live in Richmond, Virginia, which has the second highest eviction rates in the country. And even though we're working on it, it's definitely something slow, like Noah said. The wheels of government turn slow, and I definitely think that's really, really present in housing justice and housing reform. And unlike other issues that might sort of evolve as our social attitudes evolve, housing injustice and housing inequality is something that's going to exist in the future as long as there's no government action around it, as long as we're not helping people who don't have houses buy houses or rent houses cheaper at a more affordable rate. And I think it's really, really important to do so because as we're all aware, housing is central to everything we do. You need an address to apply for a job. You need an address to adopt a kid if you're interested in doing that. And all of that ties back to having a home. And for young people in particular, because housing costs are rising, we see student homelessness, which is an incredibly large problem among all our communities. And I think we need to start in housing in order to ensure that everybody has access to that most basic human right.
Awesome, y'all. I heard youth commissions, education reform, racial equity, school to prison pipeline, reducing money in politics, housing reform, student homelessness, which just mentioned, and incremental change. I think over the course of the last couple of months, people have been talking about why we actually can't wait, right? That the wheels of the government turn slow for certain things. We can, pin $1 trillion military budget, but when it's time to talk about putting money towards education, it's silent, right? So we know that we just can't wait. We absolutely cannot wait for these things because people's lives are at stake. And I think all of us here recognize that if we do wait, then more violence is sure to come towards our communities that we deeply, deeply care about. So last question for you all. The title of the panel is New Voters, New Solutions. Now that we have named some of the critical issues, how do you want to see your county, city, state, or Congress address those issues? What are the solutions that come to mind? You all came up with all the different types of solutions just now where you thought about the problems. Well, how do we get there?
Well, all these problems, I'm sure that they have solutions in some way. And I feel like the first step to a lot of this is information, making sure that everyone is educated, making sure that everyone knows that these are problems. Because the first step of solving a problem is making sure that people are educated and know that this is actually a problem. And so with this education, we have to start making things that are called radical aren't really radical. The Green New Deal is not radical. Healthcare for all is not radical. And we have to make sure that people understand that. Because right now, a lot of people automatically start attacking it and won't even hear what a politician says as soon as they say healthcare for all. They be, oh, healthcare for all, that's too expensive. And they completely shut down to that candidate. When really we should open up and really hear what these candidates have to say about healthcare for all, how it really benefits everyone, and how this money that we're putting, as many of you guys have mentioned, to the military or spending it to other countries, we could really be using that money for our country. How come we're able to give a huge budget to other countries overseas, countries that really don't give us a huge benefit, countries in the Middle East like Israel? How are we able to give them $400 billion every year and not cover healthcare for our own citizens? It really makes us rethink a lot of that. And so the next important thing that I just wanted to discuss was about information, is really we have to let people know that you can run for office. And it's something that comes from a really young age. Like in New York City, you could run for a council member, you can run to be an assembly member at the age of 18. Many people don't know that. And so older politicians make sure that younger voters don't know that, just so then they could stay in office and they could keep running and keep going up the chain. And really, city council, assembly member, these are the people that control the money in your state and in your local area. And so if we're able to control these local elections, eventually we'll be able to control where that money is going in these, for example, in community centers and all these different places. And finally, I'd like to end off on my end where currently my work with UNICEF, which is the United Nations International Emergency Fund, where we work generally with children. And we're working for children's rights all across the world, but specifically here in the United States, there's so much work to be done. And UNICEF is trying to create child-friendly cities all across the United States. And a child-friendly city really consists of making sure that in that city, children's voices are heard. Children feel safe in that city. And this is not only children, but children and youth, by making sure that they have the proper upbringing. And so in general, all across the United States, cities are slowly becoming child-friendly cities and getting accredited by UNICEF. And so really, we should be able to push that harder and making that a statement that children matter, youth matter, and generally people that have been voting for all these years for these older politicians that have been there for so long, we matter, and we're willing to create change when it comes to it.
Yeah, and to build off of that, to me, looking into my community and really, the area in which I live in, and really just across the country, really, I think providing perspective, right? Providing an understanding of the reality of the people, right? A reality of the majority and what that truly is. And I think to do that, we need to center the voice of marginalized communities. We need to center the voices of people of color and center the voices of young people. And the way we do that is, Abdullah brought up earlier in this call, how we build youth commissions, how important that is to hear the voices of the people, how we need to work to build commissions made up of people of color and marginalized people, because, by doing so, we would not only be serving these communities and uplifting these communities, but we would be, bettering the entire district, bettering the state, bettering the country, and really getting to the root of the problem by hearing from these people. And I hope by doing that, we'll be able to solve a number of these issues that we're facing currently.
Yeah, so I'm no policy expert, so my answer is pretty general. But I will say that I think as a whole, we need to remember that we live in a representative democracy, and our elected officials are supposed to represent the will of the people. So I think that in a general way, I'd really like to see policy that reflects community, that's more community minded and community driven. I know that as constituents, it's our responsibility, yes, to help set the agenda and helps, push our concerns and our issues. But I'd like to see elected officials at all levels of government really take the responsibility for themselves to reach out to their constituents and see what our communities need, instead of taking it from a small group of people. And I also really wanted to stress the point earlier, of money for a lot of the different issues that we're centering. We have the money. Our government funds what they want to fund. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. It's very clear, it's been clear throughout history. So I think that our focus needs to shift, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, going off of that and just the perspective that we take to policies, that we need to put people first, instead of politics and whatever agendas folks have. And then just also pointing out the intersectionality of all these issues and how the pandemic has really exposed the cracks in our system, in our criminal justice system, in our healthcare system, all across the board, and how we really need to center people in those policies first. And then even I wanted to take the time just to say real quickly, even the census, what happened with the census this year, the fact that the federal government basically took away time from us when we were counting the amount of people that we needed so we could get our funding to allocate them to our communities, so we could get proper funding for our communities, and the fact that that's going to impact us for the next 10 years. I know that California is being affected. We lost, I believe we're losing a seat in the House because of this, because our communities weren't counted. So just the impact of policies and the long-term effects in our bureaucracies.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. Definitely what everyone said. Just making self-awareness and allowing everybody to make their voices heard on what the changes they want to see, they want to be seen change, and solutions to these problems. I'll just say to reallocate the resources created to create a level playing field and redirect public spending toward crime prevention and drug treatment. I'm pretty much sure everyone said money is a big part in all of this, and we have the funds to change it, and it just hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, I mean, everything that it's kind of been talked about in this last section about, policy changes we want to see is, I find that our generation is being labeled as, radical or outlandish, or these things can never be done. But, integrating schools was a radical idea. You know what I mean? Gay marriage, was a radical idea at certain points in our history. You know what I mean? And now these are things that are just kind of staples of our society, and they are who we are. So, do not let these labels or what people say about, the changes we want to make, do not let them discourage you, and don't let them discourage others from fighting for what we want to do. And, when it comes to money, the big thing is people always talk about, oh, well, if we have publicly funded college education, think that's going to cost, $80 billion a year. Or, if we have Medicare for all, that's going to cost, $265 billion a year. And that's the big thing it's the cost, it's the price tag on the surface, but people don't really like to talk about the benefits down the road. If all these people start getting college degrees and we have a more educated workforce and a more skilled workforce, our economy is going to grow in size. If we have people that aren't worried about, losing their health care, that's going to drive people wanting to start their own business and entrepreneurship. And that's what our country is founded on, is entrepreneurship and small business. That is so important to our country. So, don't lose sight of our goals, and don't let people, disillusion you with, how it was or how they think it should be, because, a lot of these people already have a foot out the door, and we are going to be here in the United States for another 60 years. Every person in this panel, we're going to be alive for a long time. So we really need to be working to make the change we want to see. So, yeah.
I agree as well with what all the other panelists said. As Christina mentioned, I am no public policy analysis, but I have done some of the basic research behind it. And specifically here in Georgia, which is where like my career interests lie, when you look at the numbers just simply behind like a tobacco tax or something simple of that nature, you could fund the things that we want to do in education or criminal justice reform. Like everyone has said, the money is there, the research is there, the information is there. It's just that people choose to ignore it. And our generation is going to say no longer to you ignoring all this information and the changes that need to be made. I'm sick and tired of it, frankly. I grew up, my brother has been incarcerated for 14 years, which is why I'm super heavily invested in the school to prison pipeline, because I've seen how he was treated in the schools that I also attended and got treated the same way simply just because of the color of my skin. I stand as a Truman Scholar, but yet some people simply couldn't look that I was just a bright young Black female, and I was only 6 years old. So these things exist. And for people to say that there's no money in it and that it's a political issue, no, it's a human issue. I am literally just a regular student, just trying to make it out, do something for my family. And this isn't politically based. It just happens to be the process to get these things done are pushed through our political system. And so until that message is conveyed, I will continue to fight here in the South to make sure that our young Black men and women aren't pushed into in-school suspension. They're not pushed into these alternative schools that literally push them to go into juvenile detention centers that lead to our state prisons.
And I absolutely want to echo everything everyone's been saying. I think my sort of solution that I'd like to be implemented is pretty simple, and that's just to listen like we're doing right now, to listen to everyone's experiences and everyone's stories. I think we all oftentimes have preconceived notions about the other side or other people. And because we're such a divided nation right now, whether politically or racially, I think it's really important that we go into any conversation with open ears, and that's how we're going to be able to figure out what policies we need to be implemented, what things we need to do to change our system, because there's no doubt about it, our system is broken right now. But it's only through listening to the people who are affected by that system and listening to everybody, period, with open ears is how we can make change in our country.
Y'all have been incredible. The answers to this last question, I hope everybody was taking notes because you all gave the solutions right there. That was incredible. I want to uplift Christina, that moment when you said the money is there. That is key. That is so key. And I hope everybody really heard that the money absolutely is there. And it's incredible that you know that, Christina, and that everybody listening hopefully now knows. Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and pass it to Alyssa. That's the end of our questions.
Thank you, Delaney. Thank you, panelists. So I'm going to do a couple of questions that were submitted through the Q&A and submitted in the chat. And so there was a lot of questions about how to make young people excited about voting, how to get them engaged around some of the policy changes you all mentioned, and just how to keep them engaged and inspired, especially knowing that change can happen slow. So I would like to ask you all, what is your advice for people who want to know how to keep young people engaged and inspired?
I think a great way to keep young people inspired is by getting them involved. You can't really inspire someone or encourage someone to go to vote when they really aren't involved with the whole voting process. So bring them onto these youth teams, bring them onto the commission, like what Ameer and I mentioned. Make them really involved in the process, and they'll eventually fall in love with it. So make it more of a process other than a duty. Make it more as something that really benefits everyone. Make it something that they will eventually love. Make it something that they know it'll help them in the future. It'll help their children in the future. It will continue helping future generations. And I feel like engagement is where it all starts. Get them engaged and they'll fall in love.
Does anyone else want to add to that question?
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me? Yes, okay, good, thank you. I would just say make civic engagement personal. Really listen to understand and not necessarily to push your own agenda or your own belief. Listen to understand and meet people where they are. And then when I say civic engagement, I mean not just voting. Really follow up after an election is over, and like Abdullah said, see how you can keep them engaged in their community outside of voting. So whether that's going to a community meeting, meeting their elected official, learning how to hold elected officials accountable. There's all different types of ways, but don't make it so much a stop and start effort. Be consistent if you want someone else to be consistent.
Yeah, I want to just hop in and say, somebody mentioned it earlier, how the United States has the lowest voter turnout out of a lot of Western democracies. I think we have the lowest. And Ameer, was it you, I believe? It's absolutely true. And then when you look at why that is, it's because in a lot of other countries, it's seen as your civic duty, which it really is here in the United States. So I think we need to keep people engaged in the manners that we are doing right now, because I think they are effective, and we've shown that they can be effective in person or online, which has been great. But I think the biggest thing is, first thing we need voting day, election day to be a national holiday, and then second thing, we need to really let people know it is your civic duty as an American citizen. We need to be participatory in our democracy. We need it. We need it. We, you know, too many people have lost their lives. Too many people have fought. Too many people have sat in jail cells and fought for their right to vote, for people to just say, no, it's not important to me. It is important. It is important. So we need to just keep educating people on why it matters, and, you know, give them all the tools they can to go out and take their vote and to go get it. We need to let that happen. So, yeah.
I'm going to attempt to combine a couple of other questions. We talked about disinformation earlier. And so there was a question in the chat about, do you all as young voters have confidence in America's voting integrity? And also, who do you all trust for information between nonprofits, influencers, media outlets? Who do you trust for information, and do you actually trust America's voting integrity?
I'll be the first. It will be really short so everyone else can answer. Voting is the first step in the door. I do not feel like voting fixes anything. It's not like a one-stop shop, go in, get what you need, come back out. It just helps you start the process. When you have someone at the table who will listen to you and that's willing to take your ideas and represent your community, I feel like that helps you get towards your cause. So that's what I would say for that. As far as who I go to for my information, I sort of just lean towards my professors more. I'm a political science student, so I'm a little bit at an advantage of how I receive my information and how I'm learning different things about our political system. I know most people get their things through media outlets. So I believe that it's my purpose as a political science student to share correct and research-based information to those people through social media who might see what's on like Shade Room or something.
Rakia, you're 100% correct when you said like voting is just the first step, because even when you vote someone into office, you never know. And so you have to continually, like we were talking about, go to city council meetings, make sure you know who your representatives are. And I think that's another big thing in our communities is most folks don't know who represents them at all levels of government. And you particularly really need to, so you can call them up for resources. As far as, but in terms of integrity too, I think that this election cycle kind of really inspired me, just seeing like just this panel right here, seeing so many young people coming out and participating, folks that I knew in my friend groups who never had the desire to vote before were like, okay, I think it's time, was really inspiring. But in terms of information, I am a student as well of public policy, so I do lean on like research articles that I get from classes, but I try to diversify my information just so I'm not leaning in one news source.
I think if I could just add on, a lot of people are really scared, like when they see information that may be true or may not be true, they're scared to just ask. And sometimes that's like the most important thing. I'm also a political science student, so we always have more fun like asking our fellow peers, asking our professors. It's so important just to ask whether something is true or not, because you really lose nothing, but you're gaining so much. Just ask your fellow peers whether they found something contrary to what you found. Just bounce ideas off each other. Say, hey, I found this, what did you find? And really you're able to learn more, educate yourselves more, and you really be able eventually to go through a process every single time you see a statistic or something that you won't automatically press that retweet button or share on Facebook. You'll think about it. You'll try passing it on to someone, say, hey, have you seen this too? Is there really something, is there a hidden agenda behind this? Is there a reason why they're sharing it? And are they spinning the narrative onto their own specific lens? And so it's really important just to ask questions whenever you see anything. And so just answering the second part of the question, the people that we really go to, and generally youth, we mostly just go to each other. Like if I want to find out about what's going on across the world or in the United States, I would most likely go to people that are on this panel right now. They're all sharing things that are pretty valid and are things that I care about too. So I'll definitely go to everyone here.
Thank you, everyone. All of those were great answers. I want to be mindful of everyone's time tonight. Um, our panelists, I don't know how you could have listened to this panel and not feel inspired and not be ready to know, to like take action, do what we have to do to really hold power accountable come January. So to end tonight, I want to give all of our panelists an opportunity to make any closing remarks that they may have. So I'm going to just start with our moderator to see if she has any closing remarks, and then we'll go down the list of panelists.
Wow. Well, first I want to say thank you, just a huge thank you for even getting the opportunity to moderate this panel. The panelists are so brilliant and have really re-sparked energy in me. I think this has been a really, really difficult year. And it's up to folks like you who are on the panel to really keep people going, to keep giving people hope, to keep moving and pushing and creating the world that we want to see. So thank you, you all. I wish that, again, that everybody could clap for you so that you could really feel how proud everyone is. And I think what I'll say is that what Christina, what Emily and Rakia have said is that voting is just the beginning. There's so many other things that you can do. There's so many things that you should be doing after you vote. And so just keep that in mind. Voting is a tool in our huge toolbox. Everybody gets to participate. We want to expose everybody to all the tools. So thank you so much for all the work that you all do on the panel.
I also really want to just start off by thanking everyone. Thank the organizers of this for allowing me to be on this panel and promoting and advocating for young voices as well. You don't really find this in many different organizations. They'll usually just bring on the older generation, bring on the politicians that are already in office, let them speak on behalf of young people. But really having young people in the same room and young people from all different backgrounds, a really diverse panel over here, and they're all saying their opinion on all these issues that are going on. But not only the issues that have been going on, but also the solutions to all of this is really inspiring. And just something that I want to close off with from my end, and it ties with the work that I've been doing, and something that really affects everyone. It's I just pasted it right now in the chat on Zoom. It's text CFCI to 52886, and it'll automatically urge your mayor to stand with children or youth. It'll send you a link right back. You press on the link, you'll put in your email information. It'll automatically send an email to your mayor, and it'll let them know that as their constituent, you stand with children and youth, and you hope that they do the same. And so if everyone could do that. And finally, I just want to thank everyone again. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just to close off, thanks, Abdullah. And again, same thing Abdullah said, thank you to the organizers. I'm sure this was not easy to put together, and it took probably a lot of time. And even being on this, I know there's a lot of back end work you guys are working on, looking through the comments. Just so I'm sure it's rough. So I appreciate you all, and thank you to the panelists. You're all phenomenal. I'm gonna reach out to every single one of you. So I'm looking forward to connecting with you all. But with that, I think something I just like to mention is something that we typically forget is how being right is not enough, truthfully, right now in our system. Just being right is not enough. We have to be able to push our legislators to make our vision and the vision of people a reality, and we need to do that through direct action organizing. And we do that when we bring the most impacted people, the marginalized people, and center their voices, right? That'll help us build collective power and really make change. And we need to make people aware of their own power to alter the relations of the way the system currently works. And I'm really looking forward to all the work that all these organizers are currently doing, and I'm just really excited to keep to stand along with you all and keep fighting. So I appreciate all your time, and I appreciate everyone who joined the call today.
I'd just like to echo those sentiments. Thank you to everyone at Common Cause and everyone who came out and listened to us tonight. This will probably be said a couple more times, but of course, we all know the election is not over. Just like some of my fellow panelists, I am still doing a lot of work in Georgia. Of course, if you are a Georgia resident, please make a plan to vote. If you have not requested your mail-in ballot and you like to vote by mail, please do so immediately. If you want to vote in person, early voting starts this Monday, December 14th. Do that if that's what you like to do. But let's just keep this momentum going. Even after this election, like we said, civic engagement never ends. So let's keep that going. If anybody would like to follow up or stay in contact with me, I'm going to put a link tree in the chat and it will take you to all my contact information. And I'll pass it on.
Yeah, I just, once again, I'll echo everyone's sentiments. Thank you so much, Common Cause, for the opportunity to be here with these amazing panelists and hearing everybody's experiences on the East Coast organizing. Y'all are doing amazing work. I'm a student in California organizing through the UC Student Association and primarily in the Inland Empire. But like they say, every year is an election year, and like Christina said, civic engagement is never ending and never over. We always have to use our voices and participate. But thank you so much.
So yeah, I just want to thank everybody who joined this session today, and the organizers, and definitely the panelists. It was really inspiring hearing all of your stories and backgrounds and where y'all come from. Definitely, like I said, it really inspired me to want to do more in my community. And just thank you to everyone who showed up today.
Yeah, same sentiment. Thank you to all my fellow panelists. Thank you to Common Cause for putting this on. Additionally, thank you to everybody here that was watching this, was a participant in this. You know, without you guys being here, listening to our message, and then I see a lot of people talking about, you know, hey, can I get the video of this? I want to share it with my friends and family. That's what this is about. The conversation, you know, and the fight, it's not going to end here, and it's not going to end for our lifetimes. So, you know, I'm just so excited to see what other people my age are doing. It's revitalizing. And, you know, I'm so excited to just about what we've done here today, and, you know, what each of you are going to be doing in the future. And yeah, thank you all.
I want to share the same. Thank you to everyone that joined. It was so exciting being on this call with all the panelists. You all are so bright and you're all doing amazing work. I'm super excited to see what we do in our country that's forth. Just to highlight back to what Christina said, here in Georgia, if you are not a resident, there are plenty of phone banking and text banking opportunities that you can join in on. So we would appreciate all your help from across the nation in helping our Senate runoff elections. And that is all for me. I hope you have a wonderful night and continue to stay safe.
And just to close off tonight, again, thank you guys so much. I'm sounding a little bit like a broken record now, but thank you guys so much for coming. I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and it's so exciting to see everyone's ideas. And one thing that I took away from the panel that I hope everyone took away is that even though, like, in this huge 330 million plus country, it feels like our individual voices don't matter. It feels like we're insignificant. But each of our ideas, each of our policy proposals, each of our thoughts matters, because we bring a unique perspective to the table no matter what we're talking about. So I think that's really, really important, that we really stay connected and that we really focus on amplifying our own voices and amplifying other voices to make sure that we can improve our country, because it is up to us, whether we're young or old, no matter what race we are, no matter what background we are, it is up to us to change our country. And I definitely think we can do that.
All right, thank you everyone so much for taking time out. I know this was a pretty lengthy panel, and for some of our East Coast people, kind of late at night, but we appreciate all of you for joining us. Please feel free to follow our panelists in the Common Cause Student Action Alliance on all of the social media outlets. If you have questions about our Student Action Alliance and any work that we're doing, feel free to email youthprograms@commoncause.org. You all will receive a recording of this webinar. I know that was asked a few times. So again, just thank you all so much for joining and also for staying till the end. I hope you all have a great night, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation at another time. Thanks.